Welcome to the lecture series on removable partial denture. Let us start our lecture by discussing the Kennedy's classification. Kennedy's classification is a very important system which is used for classifying the partial edentulous arches. This classification was first given by Dr. Edward Kennedy in the year 1925. Kennedy classification has four basic classes in it: Class 1, Class 2, Class 3 and Class 4. Let us see what is Class 1 first. Class 1 is a bilateral edentulous areas located posterior to the natural teeth. Bilateral edentulous areas. Bilateral means the edentulous areas are located on both the sides, on this side and also on this side. And these areas are located posterior to the natural teeth. These are the natural teeth. And these edentulous areas are located posterior to the natural teeth. Next is Class 2. In Class 2, a unilateral edentulous area. This is a unilateral edentulous area. That means the edentulous area is present only on one side of the arch, and this edentulous area is located posterior to the remaining natural teeth. In Class 3, a unilateral edentulous area is present with natural teeth remaining both anterior and posterior to it. That means there is an edentulous area which is present only on one side of the arch, and this edentulous area is surrounded by the remaining natural teeth on the anterior side and also on the posterior side. In Class 4, a single but bilateral edentulous area is located anterior to the remaining natural teeth. That means edentulous area is single, but it is considered as bilateral because this edentulous area is crossing the midline. Hence, it is considered as bilateral single edentulous area, and this edentulous area is located anterior to all the remaining natural teeth. Next, let us see what are modification spaces. Before understanding what are modification spaces, first let us look into this diagram. So this image is having three edentulous spaces. This is the first one, second edentulous area and third edentulous area. So out of these three, the posterior most edentulous area is determining the classification. So number one is posterior most area. This number one edentulous area will determine the classification. So this number one edentulous area is present posterior to the remaining natural teeth, and it is unilateral, and hence it comes under Class 2 Kennedy division. And the spaces which are present, the second and third space, are considered as additional spaces, and these additional spaces are known as modification spaces. So we are only considering the number of modification spaces. This is number 1 and this is number 2. But we are not considering the extent of the modification space. We are only concerned with the number of modification spaces. So this becomes Kennedy's Class 2 and Modification 2 because it is having two modification spaces. Hence it is Kennedy's Class 2 with two modifications. That is Kennedy's Class 2 and modifications 2. So this is about modification space. When we look at this diagram, this is an anterior edentulous area and all the remaining natural teeth are posterior to the area. This single edentulous area is crossing the midline, and hence it becomes Class 4 division of Kennedy. And when you take the example of this, there are three edentulous areas in this. So posterior most edentulous areas are these two. So it is a bilateral edentulous area. So it comes under Class 1 Kennedy with modification 1. This is the only extra edentulous area which is present. Only one edentulous area is present. So it is Kennedy's Class 1 modification 1. And in this image, there are four edentulous areas. So out of these four, this is the posterior edentulous area. So this comes under class 3 division of Kennedy classification. So this becomes class 3 and modification 3. In this image, there are two edentulous areas and this is coming under class 3 Kennedy. Class 3 modification 1. Because class 3 is a unilateral edentulous area which is surrounded by anterior teeth and also posterior teeth. So when you take any of the area as class 3, the other area becomes the modification. So hence it is class 3 modification 1. Next, let us see how the Applegate rules are governing the Kennedy's classification. There are 8 Applegate rules. We will look into each rule one by one. So the first rule states that classification should follow rather than precede any extractions of the teeth that might alter the original classification. That means the classification should be done after the extractions. If the classification is performed before the extractions, after the extraction there is a chance for the alteration in the classification. Hence, the classification should be performed after all the extractions were done. For example, this is a class 3 modification 3 case. If you extract this molar, it becomes a class 2 Kennedy division. Hence, the extraction should be performed first and then the classification should be determined. Rule number 2 is, if third molar is missing and is not to be replaced, it is not considered in the classification. That means, if suppose this is a third molar, if it is missing and there is no idea to replace this missing teeth, then this teeth is not considered in the classification. This scenario becomes class 2 modification 3. In rule number 3, if a third molar is present and is used as an abutment, then it has to be considered in the classification. If this is a third molar, if it is present and there is an idea to use this third molar as an abutment, then it has to be included in the classification. In that case, this becomes class 3 modification 3. So based on the inclusion of the third molar, classification is changing. Rule number 4. If a second molar is missing and is not to be replaced, it is not considered in the classification. In this image, this is the second molar area where the tooth is missing and there is no intention to replace this second molar. Hence, it is not considered in the classification. So this becomes the most posterior area and this area will determine the classification. This is the area where we don't have any intention to replace the second molar. Hence, these areas are not considered in the classification. We are considering only these two areas and this becomes the class 3 modification 1. And next is rule number 5. The most posterior edentulous area always determines the classification. In this image, this is the most posterior area out of 4 edentulous areas. There are 4 edentulous areas, 1, 2, 3 and 4. So out of all these, this is the most posterior area. So this determines the classification. So it becomes class 3 modification 3. Rule number 7 states that the extent of modification is not considered, only the number of additional edentulous areas are considered. For example, in this diagram, there are 4 edentulous areas, 1, 2, 3 and 4. The first edentulous area is determining the classification because it is the posterior most area. So this comes under the class 3. And the other 3 spaces are considered as modification spaces. So these modification spaces are not determined by their extent. We are only considering the number of modification spaces here. So there are 3 modification spaces, 1, 2, 3. Hence it becomes class 3 modification 3. Next is rule number 8. No modification areas can be included in the class 4 arches. So this is a case of the class 4 arch. So there are no modifications in the class 4 arches. Why? If there is any modification, it has to be present posterior to it. But this is the anterior most area and there cannot be any modification in the anterior region. So if suppose this premolar is missing in this arch, then this becomes the posterior edentulous area. Now this becomes the area for determining the classification. Hence it becomes class 3 modification 1. So that is the reason why the class 4 arches do not have any modifications. If there are any edentulous areas behind the single edentulous area, that posterior edentulous area will determine the classification. By this, we have completed our lecture on the Kennedy's classification and Applegate rules. In the upcoming videos, we'll discuss more about the RPD. If you found this video helpful, hit the bell icon below and subscribe to my channel. Thank you for watching.